Welcome to our GlobSec special edition talk today about regulation and innovation. And we're doing this in the context of the illicit cigarette trade and also in the geopolitical context of course, the Ukraine war, Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and the changes happening in Europe and within our societies for that reason. So GlobSec has actually been focusing on that war and its consequences for quite some time. And today we want to have this particular debate about an aspect that is maybe not so often discussed, but highly necessary, as you will see, with our stellar lineup of speakers. My name is Roland Freudenstein. I'm the Vice President of GlobSec, a global think tank headquartered in Bratislava, Slovakia, and I'm the head of the Brussels office. And I have with me here Grégoire Verdeau, right next to me here, currently Senior Vice President of External Affairs of PMI, Philip Morris International, with whom we do this event in cooperation. And if I may say so, one of his claims to fame is that he was the deputy head of cabinet of Nicolas Sarkozy as president of the French Republic. So welcome. Next to him, we have General Juan Carlos Buitrago, who is currently the CEO of Strategos, but again, his claim to fame is to have been the Brigadier General and Director of Fiscal Policies and Customs in the Colombian National Police. And last but not least, we have William Stewart on the other end here, who is the president and founder of Povado, and he is a famous spin doctor on communications and an expert on opinion polling. So we have, I think, the ideal lineup here to discuss the problem of illicit trade in cigarettes, but also the consequences of that for public finances, for societies at large. And there is a study by KPMG and PMI, which has just been finished, on the phenomena, the trends, and the effects of this. And I would like you, Grégoire, to introduce us to the basic facts and findings of that report. The floor is yours.
So thank you, Roland. It's an interesting topic because trafficking cigarettes is a bit special, because that's the most trafficked product in the world. So if you wish, if you want to have a little bit of a benchmark of how a state is controlling its borders, it's controlling its market, it's interesting to look at the illicit trade of cigarettes. And I think that General Buitrago is going to give a global perspective on this. So let me indeed focus on this particular KPMG report. So KPMG is a well-known company for the rigor and of its approach and method. And one of the interests of this report is, first of all, that it's been around for a long time. It started in 2006. And we all know, the statistics, they can show from one year to the next sometimes, bumps or, sudden moves. And it's not always meaningful. What's meaningful is the trend. And the KPMG report is giving that on the illicit trade of cigarettes in Europe. And the report has enlarged over time. And one of the novelties of the 2022 edition, because it's been published now, but it's on the 2022 year, is obviously the inclusion of Moldova and Ukraine into this report, which of course is underlining the particular geopolitical context that you have mentioned in your introduction. So we see two very interesting things. The first one is that while you have, which is consistent with a global trend, a little bit of a decrease of the consumption of cigarettes in that wider Europe, and so like the rest of the world, you have a little less of cigarettes being consumed. Well, in Europe, you have a little more of that number in percentage that are consumed through illicit sources. And so that is already a fact to put in perspective, because it is a well-known, a sort of one of these conventional truths that are actually a lie, which is that, well, the cigarettes are going to go down, but no one ever speaks about that, which is okay, but what is the legal market of cigarette? Where is it going? Well, the legal cigarette market is actually shrinking, and the illegal one is increasing. The second main fact of his report is that you don't have one Europe. You actually have two Europes. And that's where it's interesting, because we talk in Brussels, and you're the head of the Brussels office. One of the same thing, conventional wisdoms, it's actually a lie. That happens, it's commonly mentioned in the cities that, you have a Western European founding member states that are rigorous, well in charge, they know what's going on, and then you do have countries in the south and in the east, and some of them come from, have a socialist past, and some of them were underdeveloped economically, so they control things a little less. And there is nothing that could be more wrong than that when it comes to the report, because you can see that Portugal, Greece, Romania, Poland have a record low level of illicit trade of cigarettes. And it's a trend that has happened in the space of, 4 or 5 years. A country like Italy, which, has the harbor of Napoli, has 2% illicit trade of cigarettes. So you have that Europe, which is southern and eastern, and then you have Western European states, and frankly speaking, you have France, the country I know best, which is sort of like a different country, different Europe, but almost a different continent, because, and this is where I turn to you, I'm thinking about Ecuador, where the market is, 80% illicit. In the cigarette market in Ecuador is about that amount. Well, France, in the space of a few years, has now, and these are the 2022 figures, 1/3 of its market that is now illicit, and the half of that third is counterfeit cigarettes. And no other country in Europe has this sort of pattern. And so that's the main teaching of a report, really, which is there is not a European trend. You have one Europe that frankly has the trafficking of cigarettes under control, and then you have France, and to a lesser degree Belgium, which we know is unfortunately on the forefront of narco-traffic in Europe, going completely the other way.
So before I turn to the general, I just one more follow-up question to you, Grégoire. How do you explain this? What are the reasons for this, in your view, or in the report's view?
So, cigarettes is, everyone knows it's a very popular product. It's a consumer product, and it is bought every day by the people who smoke. Most of them smoke daily. It is not like you are buying a car or a fridge. It is a purchase that you can shift every day, and it's extremely price sensitive. It is price sensitive for also, given the profile, socio-economic profile of the smokers, most of them don't belong to the top income bracket in society. We are talking about people who sometimes are unemployed, or they are working, but they are working hard, tough jobs. They wake up early, they go to bed late, they have odd hours, and that sort of thing. And these people can shift their purchase around very quickly, because also they have been hit very hard by inflation in Europe. And so what you look at in France and in Belgium is also the results, frankly, of a very direct impact of a very strong, brutal hike in taxation of tobacco, with the notion that these people, like with a magic wand, because the taxation would be very high, they would stop smoking. They didn't stop smoking at all. They took their business to the black market.
Okay, we're coming to policy answers later on in another round, but I'd now like to broaden the picture and ask General Buitrago, also as a former high-ranking police officer, what's the picture, what is your comment based on your experience about the damage that illicit trade can cause?
Thank you, Roland. It's a pleasure to be here with Grégoire and with our colleague at the heart of the European Union in Brussels, talking about illicit trade. From my experience and knowledge, I think that illicit trade is neither petty nor victimless. It is a high profit and low risk crime, which serves as a funding source for transnational criminal network. And that's why we all have to role to play in order to tackle this global threat and cross-industry issue. Criminal organizations, including terrorist groups and drugs trafficking networks, are threatening our national and international security. And they are funding they are threatening our society, they are affecting the growth of the economy, and they are becoming as a funding source of all those criminal activities that we are seeing every day. The fact that illicit trade of different products, including tobacco, pharmaceutical, electronic, and technology products, are a revenue source to support those criminal activities and those serious crimes is a reality that we have to face on. In today's context, in a period of post-COVID recovery, of economic recession, of geopolitical crisis, this is even more relevant that consumers, governments, and the private sector are looking for economic recovery, restoring supply chains, whilst managing the inflation and increased burden on household income that is a real problem. At the same time, however, criminal organizations themselves are benefiting from national, regional, and global challenges, where we're talking today about the relation between drugs trafficking networks and the illegal immigration, for instance, in South America and other criminal activities. Basically, while the world suffers, criminal groups' profits grow and diversify. That's the problem. For the European Union, for instance, there is a serious risk, according to the words that we just heard from Grégoire. I totally agree with what you say, because the European Union has lost 11 billion euros in 2022 as a result of illicit trade of tobacco products only. In Latin America, for instance, is around 6 billion euros each year. And these are funds that go for criminal activities, go into the pocket of the corrupt people, and also for international terrorist groups. As an example of the tight relationship between illegal cigarettes trade and transnational criminal organizations links both the Central America gangs and the Mexican cartels and Middle East terrorist group. We are seeing every day those kinds of criminal organizations that I just mentioned in South America trying to take the control of drugs trafficking and other criminal activities. So I think in order to end, that if we have 2.4 thousands of tons of cocaine leaving from South America to North America, Europe, and Asia, they have to monetize this money. what they are doing is just to taking cocaine to North America, Europe, and Asia, and buying illegal products, counterfeit products in Asia, especially in China, in India, in South Korea, in order to bring those illegal products to Latin America and other countries. And Panama is the hub, is an strategic axis where those illegal products come. Cocaine also go out from here, from this country, in order to distribute these illegal products in the surrounding countries in the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. So they need to monetize these incomes from the drugs trafficking, and they use illegal products, contraband, counterfeit, in order to monetize that money.
Okay, an interesting cycle of illicit trade, in different forms. So turning now to William, being the opinion poll specialist here, what do you make of the facts and figures that Grégoire and the General mentioned? Does society actually view these developments as a problem? What sort of insights can you share from your multi-country survey that your firm undertook last year?
Yeah, Roland, the very simple answer to your question is yes. Society absolutely views the illicit trade of tobacco as a problem. And before I delve into that and explain that a little bit further, let me just talk about this survey that you just referenced that my firm, Pavado, conducted. It was a survey that was conducted last November. It was fielded across 13 different countries in the EU. In each of those countries, we surveyed 1,000 adults. So in total, we surveyed about 13,000 people as part of that survey. And one of the things that we found is that 2 out of every 3 European citizens indicates that the illicit trade of tobacco products is a problem, both in their country as well as throughout the EU. And it doesn't really matter how you ask the question. We asked it both ways in the survey. Do you view the illicit trade of tobacco products as being a problem in your country? Do you view the illicit trade of tobacco products as being a problem throughout the EU? Regardless of which way you ask it, you get about the same numbers. Just about 66%, or like I said, 2 out of every 3 adults is saying, yes, it is a problem. Now, the numbers do stick out in 4 countries in particular, and that's going to be in Bulgaria, Greece, Romania, and piggybacking on Grégoire's comments, in France. And so in those 4 countries, you will see the percentage of the population indicating that the illicit trade of tobacco is a problem go all the way up to more like around the 75% mark. So there, 3 out of every 4 people in those countries is saying that the illicit trade of tobacco is a problem. But anyway, I mean, it is high throughout the entire continent. You asked about just other things that stood out to me in the data. I think another thing that I would point to is just the extent to which the public really underestimates the amount of lost tax revenue as a result of the illicit trade of tobacco products. Only about 15% of Europeans get it right. That number that the General referenced, being about 10 billion, 11 billion euro a year in lost tax revenue. Again, only about 15% of people get that right. When you ask in a survey, how much tax revenue do you think that EU countries have lost? Look, about 50% of people just shrug their shoulders and say, I don't know. I get it. It's difficult news to kind of follow and keep tabs on. The other 35%, though, are indicating some number below 10 billion euros. So that's really where that underestimate, comes from. They might say, oh, I think they lose, a billion euro a year or 5 billion euro. So when you take that 35%, you couple that with the 50% who are unsure, that's 85% of the population. 85% of Europeans do not realize that the lost tax revenue as a result of the illicit trade of tobacco is in the vicinity of 10 billion euro. So I think that if the public was quite frankly more aware of that number and truly what the financial implications and the financial stakes were, I think that the level of concern would be even more greater or certainly more intense.
Thank you, William. Now, before we come to policies and responses, let's just stick for one brief second round with the effects that illicit trade has. And we've already sketched out a few. I mean, there are the financial losses, but there are also wider social effects. Grégoire, what comes to your mind? Where beyond the data and economic losses, what are some of the negative aspects associated with illicit trade from a social aspect?
I think the general really described very well the sort of global cycle that happens here. And so I think it's important before we sort of focus on people to understand also the dynamics behind it. And there is something that also is a bit conventional to think, well, you know, trafficking of cigarettes, wow, okay, it happens, ain't that bad. But this is fundamentally misunderstanding that this trafficking is part of a bigger value chain of crime, which the general has described. And really that is putting things in perspective. Also in the sense that the amounts are extremely serious. Because you mentioned the 11.2 billion euros that were lost in taxes by European states due to cigarette trafficking. Well, to be perfectly direct, 7+ billion of that is lost just for France. And it's interesting because being French, I follow French news. A few weeks ago, there was a report from the Court of Account that was underlining the amount of social fraud that happened in France. You know, all the cheating on allowances. And the government said we're going to do something about it. And that made the headlines for, frankly, several days. But the amount that the Court of Account in France had put as the probable amount of social fraud is 50% of that 7 billion. So we are talking about actually, we look at the tip of the iceberg because there are the concrete elements, illustration of trafficking you can see, particularly the people who, you know, sell this at the corner of the street. But this is not petty stuff at all. This is very big money. Now, on the social consequences, there are the fiscal and financial aspect we just talked about, but it is actually a true disaster for public health. Because at the end of the day, what happens when excessive taxation is sending people to take their consumption of cigarettes to the black market, and particularly when they consume counterfeit cigarettes, is that they do not actually consume cigarettes. Cigarettes are, you know, a harmful product, everyone knows that, but they are a regulated product. You have norms and standards. Here, counterfeit is a fake cigarette, which, by the way, usually is being proposed to the unsuspecting consumer. The consumer is asking, why is it so cheap? Oh, it's duty-free. So the package tells you it's a duty-free pack. But actually inside you don't have cigarettes. You have something that contains some low-quality tobacco and contains cement, poison, hair, various things. And that's really important to understand that because, you know, at the end of the day, we're talking about vulnerable people. When you look at smoking prevalence for the people who enjoy a privileged status in society, in European countries, it is usually a little bit above or lower to 10% of that particular category of the population. But in the country I know best, France, but that's not really different elsewhere. If you're unemployed, well, 50% of unemployed people in France smoke daily. Of course, they cannot afford to pay the taxes, which is 80% of the price of a 12 euro pack. Okay? So how could people who live on allowances pay about 2,000 euro of taxes a year just for tobacco? So it is very likely that they are the ones consuming these counterfeit cigarettes. And that means something. That means that excessive taxation is not only making the criminals rich, is also making the poor very, very, very sick.
General, based on your experience, can you share with us what the extent of the damage is that the illicit trade causes, maybe also in other parts of the world?
Thank you, Roland. Yeah, as Grégoire mentioned, if in Europe there are some problems with specific countries like France, Ukraine, Belgium, and even UK, in Latin America and the Caribbean, we have also some countries with a very serious problem. Because I think that some of them don't acknowledge that the problem exists. So that's why what Grégoire mentioned about that related to the right policies, the right legislation framework, the right enforcements are very important in order to have a healthy state. But some particular cases in Latin America that I want to mention, for instance, Ecuador. Ecuador is like the Switzerland in South America, because there we have the highest taxes, but the highest illicit trade indicators. So 9 from 10 cigarettes in Ecuador are illicit. Also in Panama. In Colombia, around 3-4 cigarettes to 10. And as we mentioned, Panama is a strategic axis, is the hub of the problem, because first, Panama is catalogued as a gray list country by the International Action Financial Group, Gafi, due to the strategic deficiencies of the government. First, corruption, because Panama Canal is used by illegal organization, organized crime, and illicit trade, as we mentioned before, and also because each time is becoming a financing place for terrorist activities, according to the report of the International Financial Action Group, and also due to the deficiencies in the banking systems and the controls in these international financial systems. In fact, I think that the Panama Canal has grown to become a real problem used by those criminal organizations to potentiate illicit global trade. In addition to this, not only Panama Canal is the problem, it's Panama Colon Free Trade Zone. We were just talking about this in Dubai, in the World Free Zones organization. I had the opportunity to be there to share about these worries. We were in Istanbul. Also, we were talking about Singapore and other hubs around the world, like Panama, that have similar characteristics, similar problems, and similar deficiencies in the banking systems, in the control of this illegal or illicit trade. But there are even more worrisome aspects that I want to mention just to finish. First, the belief of some officials or institutions that, for instance, in particular in Panama, that illicit trade transiting through Panama, some 8 billion illegal cigarettes transit each year through Panama, going to the surrounding countries, to the Caribbean, Central, and South America. Some officials and institutions don't believe that this problem is their problem. First. Second, Panama is one of the countries that keep adopting prohibitive measures that indirectly facilitate illicit trade, intended or unintended measure, but the results are very bad. So I'm moving all the time from the United States to Argentina in order to help the private and the public sector in order to have a similar approach to tackle the problem on the same route with Parlatino in Panama, for instance, which the private industry has helped a lot in order to standardize process against laundry money, illicit trade, organized crime, etc., etc. But I repeat, there are some countries that don't acknowledge that the problem exists, that it is not their problem. I think that is the situation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, William, you have talked in some detail about the awareness or lack of awareness of the tax losses. What do you have to say about the public's awareness about these other aspects, health, poverty, social inclusion, exclusion? What does the public think about that?
Well, I think to start, I'll go back to what I said at the very beginning, and just to frame my response, reminding you that it is 2 out of every 3 European citizens that indicate that the illicit trade of tobacco is a problem. That is their perception. That's a really high number. For people to indicate that something is a problem, I look at public opinion all day long, and all I can say is, when you start seeing things, in this case, well above the 50% mark, that should absolutely catch your attention. This is something that the public views as a problem. Now, I think why that is relevant is because for something to reach that level, for 2/3 of the population to say that something is a problem, they've got to be aware of the consequences. You don't say that something is a problem unless you know that it has real negative consequences. And I think, what we see in the survey data is that the public is very aware of what some of those very real consequences of illicit trade are. So, for example, some of the things that we're seeing in the data is very strong majorities of the, very high percentage, very strong majority of public opinion indicating that the illicit trade of tobacco undermines efforts to reduce smoking rates. We also see high majorities of the population indicating that the illicit trade of tobacco undermines efforts to undermines efforts, to kind of keep tobacco out of the hands of youth. We also see very strong numbers, very high numbers, well above the 50% mark of people indicating that the illicit trade of tobacco really has negative consequences when it comes to the safety, security, and public health of their individual country. And I think one final one is also just, really strong majority of, EU citizens indicating that they understand that the illicit trade of tobacco really makes it less likely that smokers are actually going to quit. And so, throughout those examples that I listed, I kept talking about strong majorities and big numbers. I think just to be very precise about it, what we're really talking about is numbers in the 67 to 77% range. And so when you put a statement in front of people, do you think that the illicit trade of tobacco undermines efforts to reduce smoking rates? 77% of people indicate that it does. So again, people totally get it. They absolutely, on all of these different measures, understand that the illicit trade of tobacco has very, very real consequences. And I think as a result of that, it's not surprising then that we also see in the survey data that 3/4 of people, 75%, say that eliminating the illicit trade of tobacco is an absolutely essential part to tobacco control policy. So you can't have effective tobacco control policy unless you're dealing with illicit trade. More specifically, they're saying eliminating illicit trade. I think just further case in point, or just to help bolster that argument, not quite as strong as that 75% number that I just referenced, but also up in the 67, 69% of people saying that as long as illicit tobacco is available and on the market, smoking rates, the efforts to bring down and reduce smoking rates, they're just simply not going to be successful. People get it.
Thank you, William. Grégoire, back to you, and back to the question indeed of political solutions. So, people get it. Are governments getting it?
You're right, Roland. That's really the first step. and before we can observe what they should do, well, where does that come from? And that's a really interesting European exercise, because you have these southern countries, these Eastern European countries that are really low level of illicit trade. 2% in Portugal, 2% in Italy, very low level in Poland, in Croatia, in Slovenia, in Romania, under 10%. Greece, still high, but going really in the right direction, massively decreased in the space of a few years. So what did they do right? And I'm emphasizing this because you were kind enough, I hope that was kindness, to remind that I used to be a French official. And
no harm in that.
Nobody's perfect. But it's this thing where I know very well that this is going to be a challenge for the French mentality to say, should we learn from Romania? And I'm saying this because you had a number of spats happening in the European politics. You have the French Minister of Interior telling Italy, oh, you're not able to do border control. Well, with all due respect, when it comes to illicit trade of cigarettes, France is in no position to give lessons to anyone. And it takes a particular flavor when you have Schengen discussions about Romania. Okay, fair enough, but Romania, when it comes to the most trafficked product in the world, is doing very, very well compared with some Western countries. And in Belgium, where this discussion takes place, illicit trade of cigarette has doubled in the space of 1 year. So I'm saying this because this is a moment of truth in a way in European politics where, who is actually serious about this? And what did those southern and European countries did right that these sort of founding members should maybe learn about? Well, they did 3 things. One is fiscal moderation. Frankly speaking, it's just being reasonable about taxation. Clearly, in the countries who have succeeded in keeping the illicit trade of cigarettes low and making it lower, they understood that this is a very price-sensitive product that is bought by a rather modest income population that is subject to inflation, and that unfortunately you have an abundant offer of illicit trade of cigarettes offline and online. So they are doing this moderately, reasonably when it comes to taxing tobacco. Point 1. Point 2, they work. Of course, the law enforcement is working hard on this, but it's working also with the industry. And I'm saying this because you have a little bit sometimes of a holy war of ministries of health against the tobacco industry. But with all due respect, if you want to know if a pack of cigarettes is fake or real, it's better that you address this with the experts, and the experts are in the industry. And in the countries that have managed this well, like Italy, we do, PMI, have a framework agreement with the Carabinieri and the other forces, law enforcement in Italy, to just give them the right expertise. And thirdly, the key point is the development of alternatives to cigarettes. Smoke-free products are the revolution of the tobacco and nicotine industry. These are a lot less harmful products. This is now recognized and validated by more and more regulators, starting by the American FDA, when it comes to heated tobacco products. And so you have plenty of these products, whether it's electronic cigarettes or heated tobacco, that are making progress in parts of Europe. And they are the way out, because it is clear that you will not have governments lowering taxes on cigarettes. Everyone knows this is politically unfeasible. Once you have taken them up, it is almost impossible to take them down. So the point is offering a way out to adult smokers. The majority of adult smokers, the vast majority, I must say, don't quit. So offer them a way out, please, through less harmful alternatives. And when you see the 3 happening, this sort of self-restrained, reasonable taxation of tobacco and nicotine products, very good law enforcement, and obviously a progressive policy on alternatives to cigarettes, you have a winning combination. And it's true that this is the sort of dividing Europe in two, the South and the East having understood that, and France and Belgium being, I would say, in the old prohibition mind.
So again, ex oriente lux, as the Romans used to say. The light comes from the east. Okay, General Buitrago, what other solutions and policy responses would you see to tackle the problem?
Thanks, Roland. Yeah, I'm in a very similar lines like Gregoire, because my experience during 33 years working in the Colombian National Police, fighting organized crime, illicit trade, money laundering, mafias, etc., I had the opportunity at that time, especially when I became general, as director of Custom and Fiscal Police, to work together with the private sector and with other countries. I realized that authorities must be more open and to trust in a private sector. Because I can't believe that today some authorities, because I have seen this in the last days, don't realize, don't understand, or don't want to understand that, for instance, companies, some private company like PMI, for instance, has a new transformation transformation vision in order to tackle the problem, to find new solutions, intelligent solutions, because I'm totally agree that illicit trade, we never are gonna eliminate illicit trade. We can maybe mitigate to control it, but not mitigate. Another experience that I want to share with you is that during my 2 years as director of Fiscal and Custom Police, we fight strongly illicit trade, mafias, the criminal ecosystem that are around this illicit trade. We dismantled 92 criminal organizations, 21 of them international and regional organizations with the help of Europol, Interpol, and Maripol, federal agencies of the United States, OLAF from Europe, and also with information coming from the private sector, because we were opened in order to get this cooperation that, I repeat, is very important in order to tackle the problem. But at the same time, while as director of the Colombian National Fiscal Police, tackling and facing this problem, government decided to increase taxes in tobacco. So the paradox is that, or the contradiction is that during my 2 years fighting illegal trade, illegal tobacco, illegal products, the problem increased 2, 3, I think that almost 4 points because the excessive taxation. Not because I didn't the job fighting criminal structures because of the taxation. But just in order to get to the point, I think that first, authorities must to acknowledge and understand the problem, to be more open. Second, as I mentioned, officials has to recognize that the problem exists. Third, effective regulation is very important. Illicit trade is not only a topic of or a matter of intellectual property or tax evasion. It's also, as I mentioned, a global threat that affects our national and international security. And finally, government has to invest in new technologies, innovation, and to understand, as I mentioned, when the private sector want to help with new policies, with innovative policies, they go to the transformation vision, for instance, in order to help to the society, not only authority, the society, to solve the problem.
Thank you so much. A case for public-private partnership, one might say. William, the pollster question again. So if society recognizes illicit trade as a problem and agrees that it causes a number of negative consequences, do they give any indication of what good policy responses would look like?
Look, I think broadly speaking, the public supports harm reduction when it comes to tobacco and smoking. And I can point to three different things. We can talk about information, we can talk about tax, and we can talk about maybe what I would call like encouragement or endorsement. And so on the first item, information, again, we see strong majorities of the EU population indicating that smokers should be provided with accurate, scientifically substantiated information about less harmful products so that they can make informed choices about the products they choose or choose not to use. On the issue of tax, again, we see really high, strong majorities of the population, in and around 70-75% of, again, all citizens, this isn't just smokers, but all citizens throughout the EU, indicating that less harmful products should be taxed less than conventional cigarettes, so as to encourage smokers to quit from conventional cigarettes to these less harmful products. And then thirdly, on this point around, encouragement or endorsement, again, very strong numbers, well north of the 50% mark, indicating that the public supports really, government, kind of endorsing government policies that encourage people to either quit smoking altogether or to switch to less harmful products. And so I think what that all really adds up to is that, governments, they really, I think, just need to be decisive about what their position is on tobacco harm reduction. Are they going to be helpful, or are they going to be, are they going to try to help it, or are they going to try to hurt it? And in doing that, you simply can't ignore, this issue of illicit trade. Illicit trade is a critical part of the equation when it comes to harm reduction. And then this is, I think when you kind of get into then, conversation and topics around fiscal policy, just given, the comments that we've heard so far, but just the very direct linkage between fiscal policy and illicit trade, and then therefore, the impacts that illicit trade has on overall harm reduction efforts.
Thank you so much. I think it's time to wrap up, and I want to get from each one of you, gentlemen, a very, very short and snappy, quotable statement on how best to tackle illicit trade. Grégoire, we start with you.
I'll start by saying it's really a test first about whether in Europe there is a true concern about the health of low-income people who smoke cigarettes. And it's also a test of whether there is the ability from some countries in the western part to learn from the southern and eastern part, which is not usually what is the momentum of European discussions. In terms of what to do, well, it's precisely taking my cue from what has worked, which is be reasonable on taxation, be forceful on law enforcement, and be progressive on policy.
Thank you so much. General.
Simply put, I think that we cannot discuss revenue growth, economic advancements, social improvements, innovation without factoring the presence of countries, organizations, and individuals that are and will continue putting all our advancements at risk. I think that this is a very important point. The case of Panama and Latin America, some Latin American countries as Europe, as we have seen here, is a proof in point. Last month, I've been working with authorities and the private sector in Latin America and the Caribbean, and I have seen that when you work together with authorities, with the private sector, in order to draw a very similar approach in order to tackle the problem, it's possible to achieve good results.
Thank you. And William, over to you.
Yeah, look, the adult population here in the EU is certainly aware of the illicit trade problem. They are aware of the consequences. They're cognizant of the consequences that it creates. They are supportive of a harm reduction approach as opposed to a high tax or prohibitionist approach. So I guess the advice, the thing for governments to think about is are they implementing policies that are going to exacerbate this illicit trade problem, or are they going to focus on policies that I think are more focused on harm reduction principles, which is what I really think the public is kind of interested in seeing more than seeing this illicit trade problem get even worse than it currently is.
Excellent, gentlemen. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Which brings us to actually the end of this special edition talk by Globsec in cooperation with Philip Morris International. So thank you, muchas gracias, merci beaucoup, and see you one of these days. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roland.